Welcome. I'm Emily Gray. I'm the Executive Director of Mercury Musical Developments, and I'm here with my colleague James from Musical Theatre Network. We'll be hosting this event, and we are delighted to welcome all of you out there on YouTube. And I'm very excited and delighted to welcome this wonderful panel. Over the past couple of months, we've had many conversations that start with or end with a "how are you?" And of course, "how are you?" sort of means something really quite different now, I think, and the way we say it, the way we ask, the way we listen. And having had quite a few conversations with our members and the wider sector, we felt it was so important, and we've heard from so many people, that our mental health and well-being is of paramount importance at this moment. It's always important, but in terms of now and creativity and our sector going forwards, it felt incredibly important to gather a panel of experts together to give us their wisdom, their advice, their reflections, and actually just to have a bit of time together to see how we all are. So a big welcome to Mary here, and Kaiser, and to Leslie, and to Anne-Marie, and to David. And I'm so looking forward to spending this time with you and hearing what you have to say. But now I'm going to pass over to James.
Yes, echoing that, thank you so much everyone for joining us. Soon we're going to launch into the first half hour of the discussion, which will be Emily and myself asking our lovely panelists some questions about what they've noticed and about their expertise relevant to these times. In lockdown, and as we ease lockdown, it's a constantly evolving situation, isn't it? So looking at a few different aspects of people's mental health and well-being during these times. And then the second half hour, third of our discussion will be a general conversation amongst all of the panelists, taking up some of the themes that have emerged from those initial conversations. And then the final third will be questions from those of you listening live. You're watching this on YouTube. Hopefully you've got the chat function up on your screen, and that is where you can pose a question at any time throughout our discussion. Just write in the chat a question starting with this word question in capital letters, please, and that will allow our lovely Ellen Bergen, who's watching the chat feed backstage, to pick up those questions and put them to Emily and I to the panelists on your behalf. So please preface with question and uppercase letters. And if you're watching this when it's no longer live, obviously that's no longer there. So hopefully people will have asked the questions you would have liked to have asked the panelists. But we do hope you'll be able to join us and ask those questions at any point during the discussion, and we'll put them to the panelists in the final third of the discussion. Thanks for joining us. Oh, by the way, I'm James Hadley from Musical Theatre Network. I didn't introduce myself at the start, but there we go at the end.
Great, thank you, James. And I think you're going to start with introducing Mary. Is that right?
Yes, indeed. Yes. So our first of our lovely panelists is Mary Birch, who I had a lovely conversation on the phone with a few days ago. So Mary's is a counsellor, and I'd like to ask Mary to just tell us a little bit about her involvement with an initiative called Industry Minds. So Mary, if you can tell us about your role with Industry Minds, and perhaps telling us about some of the things you've been observing within that role, about the way artists are dealing with current circumstances.
Cool. Yes, well, hi everyone. I'm a counsellor. I'm actually based in Scotland. That doesn't stop me working with Industry Minds. One of the things I noticed in my career with counselling, I worked with veterans at one point. I also work with addictions and with abuse, domestic and childhood abuse, particularly with veterans and with victims of abuse. One of the things that always bothered me was the time they had to wait for help with the mental health and through the National Health, etc. Wonderful charities out there, National Health, absolutely providing a great service, but it was the numbers that were waiting. And it was always something that bothered me, always something I wanted to do something about, if I could. And then I came across Industry Minds, two wonderful young ladies, Scarlett Maltman and Kathy Reid, both actors. and they set up this charity, Industry Minds, which was looking, it was, you know, opening the dialogue on mental health, but it was also providing a timely service for anyone within the industry who was struggling. And that just got my attention, because what they were doing was, it was a kind of dream. It was my hope that that was something I could provide. Obviously, a huge interest in the theatre as well, and go, wow, this was just perfect. So speaking with Kathy, speaking with Scarlett, I volunteer my services as a counsellor, and dealing with, you know, so many in the industry, dealing with directors, dealing with writers, dancers, singers, stagehands, guys in lighting, the whole spectrum within the creative industry, for sure. And it's been wonderful work. So with them I offer a telephone counselling service, or Skype, Facebook, whatever I manage, little skills I'm picking up along the way. I can now Zoom, as you can see. Someone else does the work. And with that, so I offer my services without lockdown, I would go to London once a fortnight. I would go down to Sydenham and do some face-to-face counselling with creatives. And what Industry Minds provide is they provide free counselling if, you know, in times are hard for a lot of creatives, even in normal life. Free counselling for those that cannot afford it. There is, you know, anyone who perhaps is working. We know people still struggle to pay rent. The first thing is, yeah, get the rent paid, get the food. But if they're able to give a small donation, be that £5, wonderful. It goes to Industry Minds and helps to pay for a counselling service for those who cannot afford it. And the face-to-face is probably the cheapest around London. I don't know, someone can challenge me on that. But £25 is what's charged for counselling. And in lockdown times, with that, even we have some clients who can afford to pay, and that's reduced to £15. And what I find, I say, it's wonderful working with creatives. And maybe what's drawn my attention is very, very much that it's strange that some weeks where you'll go, wow, there's a pattern happening here. You ask what things I've maybe come across. Well, anxiety, for sure. And the anxiety that's triggered by the type of industry that it is, that almost that unknown, like going in, you know, sort of where's the next job coming from, going into auditions and, you know, waiting for that outcome. Very much the anxiety. Self-worth is a huge thing. I find as well within the industry. A lot of that, which for in lockdown, a lot of creatives, their self-worth initially came from the work. Yes. And I know I did a seminar on this, you know, a few weeks ago, looking at that, because when the jobs went, when they weren't acting, when they weren't performing, when they weren't designing a set, there was that question, well, just who am I? Do you know, what is my worth? And that was a big issue that we dealt with. The negative thinking I find starts to kick in around that self-worth, the belief in themselves, those thoughts, the beliefs, the fears, those fears that are sitting there, sometimes from childhood, that are unknown as well, are suddenly being triggered within COVID-19. And basically, a lot of it boils down to loss. And you know, if we lose anyone, if we lose something, we go through that grieving process, and finding that with individuals as well. And you think of the loss, there's that loss of financial security, there's a loss of connection, a big topic at the moment, the connection. You know, someone said to me recently, I just want someone to cuddle me. You know, it's fine on Zoom, we can see each other, we can interact, but we're missing that touch, that human connection. the loss of normality. Yes, do you know what's normal? We're having to adjust so much to a completely different world. The loss of safety, you know, and be that, you know, health, yes, financial, whatever. So really, a lot of it for individuals is that the grieving, the emotions that they're experiencing. And I'm hoping, James, you're going to tell me when my 5 minutes is up.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I think this is brilliant, because I think these are all the threads that we're aware it's a very broad area that we're going to cover.
Before I go into seminar mode.
Yes,
but
so let's come back over several of those and go into a bit more detail
those are the
in
main
the conversation.
things, and it is, I think you can see that pattern with so many within the industry, for sure.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. And just briefly, Mary, so people would find Industry Minds, make contact with you through the website for Industry Minds, isn't that right?
In Industry Minds, and certainly there's a Twitter feed as well, there's an Instagram, but yes, or just email.
Brilliant.
Find industryminds.co.uk.
Fantastic, thank you. And as I said, I'm sure we'll go back over some of those areas. There's a brilliant introduction to some of the key themes, I think. Moving on to our next wonderful panelist, Anne-Marie Lewis-Thomas. So Anne-Marie is the principal at the Musical Theatre Academy. And so Anne-Marie, there, I'd just like you to introduce yourself and tell us about your role at the MTA and how that has led into your involvement with the Time for Change initiative. Tell us a bit about that.
Okay, so I'm not an expert in this. It's as lovely as this was announced, I'm a musician, I'm a composer and a lyricist, so I'm more of an expert on that stuff. But I did, as most people have to do, created another income for myself, because as we all know, composing doesn't pay very much. And I opened a drama college. That's what I decided. I wanted to teach. I enjoy teaching, but I couldn't find a college that I kind of could align myself to in many ways. With no intentions of getting involved in mental health campaigning at all, literally wanted to train performers, and it created a course that I believe could do that in a very different way. However, as part of that, I ended up with the only counsellor, as I thought, that I could afford in my first couple of years, who happened to be a clinical nurse specialist specialising in mental health. So the intention was that it was just somebody that was used to sort of therapies and sort of group therapies, and that they would just talk to the students about all the sort of regular student things that came up. However, what was very apparent, even within our first cohort, was that we had a lot of undiagnosed mental illness in our group. Too many for it to be, it was very strange. We had a very small cohort of 13 people, and we had a lot of people that were ill. We thought in truth, we thought we were unlucky that we just had a bit of a sort of, a new college. But then year on year, what we discovered was that this was a constant, that quite a sizable group within every cohort actually had undiagnosed mental illness. And again, because our students are going to see the counsellor, this is a counsellor who's qualified to be able to diagnose and prescribe, not that we prescribe, but it was a counsellor that understood the nuance of mental illness, and would be referring our students onto the GP and onto other services. We noticed there was a pattern, that it was year on year, and then there was a survey done, Australia, I think it was, I forget now, but back in 2014, where they had sadly lost a member of the theatre community down there. They had done a survey on mental health in our industry and discovered that 1 in 3 were susceptible to mental illness, higher than the 1 in 4. That for us, that was like touching the touch paper, for want of a terrible phrase, because it was that corresponded with what we were finding. So we started campaigning vehemently to kind of make people aware that maybe what some of the things that were being seen and interpreted as regular sort of college stuff wasn't, and actually it was undiagnosed mental illness from young ages. That's now been proven, and we had quite a fight in our hands to do that. And as part of our fight and part of our initiative to try and get people to listen to us, because back then in 2014, nobody spoke about mental illness, or it was very tempered. We felt quite ostracized for speaking out about it. In 2016, we launched the Time for Change Mental Health Initiative, which is a mental health charter, which was basically taken a proactive approach to mental illness. The idea being that a lot of people don't know what the symptoms of mental illness are. So maladaptive coping mechanisms have come into play. So they're carrying on with their life, but not knowing actually that their life could be so much better, because what they're doing in their everyday life is just essentially trying to medicate. So the charter was a multi-pronged approach, but honestly, because nobody was listening to us, and nobody felt that that we were, we were this unique, weird college that was doing all this stuff. And we got theatres involved, we got producers involved and agents involved. And eventually we then got other drama colleges to look and a lot of them to join and listen to what was going on. And as the years have gone on, now mental illness and mental health is this is now everybody's talking about it. But it's been a very interesting journey, I think, to watch what a slow burn this is on, and also how it's still a slow burn, actually.
Absolutely. And obviously at the moment, slow burn is a phrase that we can all relate to. It's a slow burn, evolving situation. I know that the Musical Theatre Academy has gone online during this time. So you've got that first-hand experience of perhaps how your students are adapting to online contact and physical distancing, social distancing. Is there anything particularly you've observed of your current Musical Theatre Academy students in terms of how their mental health is impacted?
So many things. I think the main thing that I think most people would be able to recognise, that it might not actually be the lockdown that has created mental illnesses, but the lockdown has brought them to the fore. So it's not necessarily that people have been locked down and suddenly they find themselves unwell, but actually up until this point in their lives, they've been keeping very, very busy. They've been creative. They've created a lot of noise for themselves. And suddenly the world has gone quiet. And the only thing they've got left to listen to is themselves. And actually that might have been the very thing that they've been trying to avoid all the time. So while I'm sort of fairly confident that with most of our students, things get picked up quite quickly. So we kind of already knew who we had to look out for. We knew where there were going to be pitfalls. We also, that our students get free therapy and mental health support, and they've got a 24/7 hotline to our specialist. So do our graduates. But we kind of knew who, or strongly suspected who might end up needing additional support. And fortunately, it seems that people are reaching out when they get to that point.
Brilliant. No, great. And again, I'm sure we'll go back over some of those introductions to areas, but thank you so much. That's really an interesting insight. I'm going to pass back over to Emily to continue introducing our panel.
Thank you very much. So next we're going to hear from Kaiser Rose, who has many roles. She's an artistic director, she's a filmmaker, she's been a change maker for the Arts Council, and is also the external events at UK Black Pride. So Kaiser, it would be lovely to hear from you about your work around mental health and wellbeing, and particularly in this time, your work with artists. Thank you.
Thank you, and hello everyone. I think firstly, it's important to point out that we all have mental health struggles, and it's not just about the pandemic, it's not just about work, it's not just about family or anything like that. So it's just something that some of us have more than others, and there's nothing wrong with that. Gosh, where do I start? So in terms of the work that I do specifically around mental health, I am the creator and artistic director of Family Dinner, which I actually started as a pilot when I was doing my Changemaker at Arts Council in partnership with Ducky. Can't forget to mention Ducky. And the space is specifically created for people who identify as LGBTQI+, and they are people of color or Black people. And we thought that it was important because just like the reason that UK Black Pride was created, although there are several events and spaces specifically for people from the LGBT+ communities, it didn't necessarily represent some of the people from that community intersectionally. And so, you have people experiencing racism, you have people experiencing certain other things that come along with them not being Caucasian. So this space was created specifically with those people in mind, and we have an on-site therapist because during the pilot we realized that was something that people were asking about and something that we should be doing in terms of safeguarding. So that person is a fantastic person who is non-binary, and they stay in the quiet area, which is specifically curated with pillows, cushions, a soft space so people can actually lay. And actually at the last one, I felt like I needed to lay. So it's specifically for those purposes, specifically for that community where people can come along, they can lay down, they can bring a potluck dish to share food, their cultural food if they like. We have performances, we have games, and it's just a space for people to feel safely themselves around people who look and sound like them. So that's one of the things that I've been doing around mental health. Another one is called Allies Corner, and that's specifically centering people who identify as trans. And we have films, we have conversations, we have panels, and then we mingle afterwards. So it's just for people who do not identify as trans to speak to actual trans people about how we can be better allies. And therefore, it impacts on people who are trans in terms of their mental health, so that they actually have a voice where they can feel safe to say, well, actually, that's not how we see being a good ally. Could you do this or could you do that? Or things that we've never even discussed before. So it's just a space for us to learn, but also in a safer environment without judgment.
Great. And so during the lockdown, you've been doing one-to-ones with artists, I believe, is that right? And I'd love you to share some of the things we talked about, particularly around social media, but also any sort of recurring issues that you've found.
I think one thing has been, and I think that's been mentioned before and it will continue to be mentioned, is that people are concerned about making money. A lot of people are freelance and that work has completely dried up. And so people are stressed about that, they're anxious about it. And actually some people, as was mentioned earlier, they already had mental health conditions or struggles. And so this has brought it to the forefront. So it's just about having conversations with those people and trying to point them in the directions of certain grants that are happening, you know, just sharing links, because I'm not an expert on finances, but what I can do is share what I do know. So there are things like that happening. And also, when we speak about people who are LGBTQI+ and who are also people of color or Black people, what we're finding is a lot of those people, the spaces were their community. A lot of these people, not all of them, it's not necessarily always typical, but a lot of these people, their community is their family for whatever reason. And so they've been completely cut off from their family. And so what they're doing is they're going online and they're spending a lot more time on social media. However, sometimes when you go onto social media and you see people coping in a different way than you are, and it looks as though people are being very productive, it can be triggering. And what's happening is a lot of the time I'm having these conversations with people and they're saying that, you know, it really makes them feel bad to log into social media looking for community, and then they end up feeling really awful about themselves. And one of the things that I have suggested is that they utilize either the mute facilities or completely block people. It's okay to block people, but I think us here in Britain, we have a tendency to kind of like have this stiff upper lip and, you know, go on forward and it's all okay. And actually it's not. We're living through a pandemic. None of us living here today have ever gone through anything like this before. And most of our parents have never known of a time that we've had to go through any of this. So it's just about trying to make sure that people understand that you need to go at your own pace. And actually, if there are posts that trigger you or make you feel bad or you feel sad after seeing them, you can mute people. There are facilities on all your social media platforms where you can look through the settings, you can mute people. If you are still confused about how to take those steps, there are very informative ways that you can find either on YouTube that takes you through it step by step, or you can Google it and that will show you the steps. But there are ways to curate your social media experience according to how you feel and what is best for you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's so empowering. I love that phrase, curate your own social media. Really helpful. I'm sure we'll come back to some of that later. Thank you so much. And now, finances, of course, have come up a lot. And this wonderful man, David, was recommended to me by an MMD member as being one of the most wonderful people in terms of supporting how we as artists understand and work with our finances. So David runs David Thomas Media, and has been working with creative freelancers for years, and has a wonderful way of talking to us as artists. And thank you so much, David. It'd be lovely to hear about some of your advice on how we can manage our finances well. Thank you.
I'll give it a shot, and thank you for asking me to take part. I'm very flattered, and in extraordinarily good company in terms of the people and the advice that they're giving. My angle to this comes from being a production person. So my background is journalism and production, presenting on the radio. I was at the BBC World Service for many years. I was in the BBC for about 22 years. When I left 15 years ago, I set up a training business, which ostensibly was going to help people to develop their skills if they were working in broadcast production or film production. And it very quickly became clear that the whole industry was becoming more casualized. And as a result of that, people were freelancing, but they didn't know how to do it. And people were effectively operating as tiny little businesses, one-person businesses, but had no training at all or idea of how to organize themselves. So I thought, oh, well, maybe I can help a bit there. So that's how it all started out. And for the last 15 years, I've been working with freelancers in every creative area, whether it's musicians or writers or production staff in film and TV. And just trying to focus on the areas where people are finding it more difficult across the piece. And what became very clear to me was that quite a lot of people are quite frightened of figure work. I suppose I shouldn't be too surprised, because creative freelancers were probably not the ones at the front of the class in the maths lessons at school. They were probably looking forward to the drama lesson at the end of school when everybody else went to play sport or something. And I know I was one of those. So I realized that actually people didn't know where to engage with the financial side. So it became obvious that there were some really good baby steps to take to help people to engage with their own finances in a way which they didn't feel frightened of, they weren't too anxious of, to try and reduce the stress around money. And of course, in the pandemic, what's happened is that there's been a sudden shock to everybody financially. It's not that everybody has lost money, but huge numbers of people have found that bookings have dried up. And so their immediate reaction, of course, is to say, where's all that money gone? Why am I not getting money coming in? Which has increased anxiety hugely. But if I'm looking at the generic type of approach that works across the piece, whether you're in a pandemic or not, I've always concentrated on the kinds of skills where you're looking for where you can take control. A lot of people get very anxious in freelancing because they feel they're out of control and the levers of control sit with other people. So financially, I've always been keen to say to people, right, well, look for where you can control as a starting point to try and ground yourself just in the knowledge you have. And I've been doing a lot of training in the last couple of months with people all over the country who I should have been meeting face to face. Of course, that was all cancelled mid-March, but now I've been meeting people online and doing the same kind of training around how you can start to tackle that. And what we've been looking at is things like, are you sure you understand your current financial needs and assessing your current situation first? So rather than saying to yourself, well, where's the money where's it actually not coming from and how can I get more of it? You're actually saying, do I understand where all the money's going? And trying to get used to the idea that you can budget for certain different lifestyles by understanding exactly how much those lifestyles are going to cost and then working out where the money might come from. We've got lots of tools which we share, things like a sheet which enables you to just do the standard sort of breakdown of monthly costs in your life, but then it tells you how hard you need to work given a certain sort of daily rate that you might earn and things like that. And you suddenly find that as people start to use tools like that, they get less and less frightened of dealing with the finances. Once they understand their current situation, then people are able to use that knowledge to plan better. And I've always talked about the importance of looking over the next 12 months and thinking what might happen in the future. And people often say to me, well, you can't tell what the future is going to bring. And I say, well, that's not the point. It's not about predicting the future. It's about looking into the future and saying what might happen. And if there was money coming in at one rate and spending going out at another rate, then you could actually look at different scenarios. So painting different scenarios into the future, just looking at various different futures is something that we've been doing. Estimating what might happen. I had to do that myself because all my work just was completely cancelled in March. I had a full diary for the rest of the year, all went completely. And at the same time, my wife left a job and didn't have any income coming in. So we had to do this planning just on a family basis to try and work out how long we could last in different scenarios in terms of being able to pay the bills. And of course, initially, your mind just goes into a bit of a panic, thinking, well, if there's no money, how can I do anything? But of course, once you start to quantify the level of the problems, you can start to realize that the problem is actually quite a bit further down the line, by which time you might have found some solutions. So those are the sorts of approaches that I've been taking for years with people, but now they've become really important. And it's only when you know what might happen over the next while in terms of predicting different scenarios that you can then look, okay, well, what's the shortfall? So it's not quite a question of saying, well, I haven't got any money coming in, so I'm in a mess. It's much more a question of saying, well, there's no money coming in at the moment, and I need to quantify the mess. So I know that sounds a little flippant, but actually the quantification of all this stuff is a way of making it feel that you're taking control of it. And that's a lot of what the work has been that I've been focusing on in the last couple of months with all the tools and everything, and developing also lots of free tools, which are on my website for any freelancer to download and try to look at. I mean, we also looked at the importance of having a routine, not just on the financial front, but just splitting up your time so that you're looking at earning time, perhaps time for developing skills, and realizing that your creativity is still there, even though no one else is paying you for it at the moment in the same way. I thought Mary's comment earlier on about your self-worth comes from the job. I've heard that from people. And so when they're not having the job, they feel they don't know how to define themselves. But I think the important thing is to realize that you've got skills in managing yourself as a small business, if you like. Think of yourself perhaps as a one-person business, and then think about, well, how can I structure that so that I'm feeling much more in control and frankly more business-like, and that will help one realize what skills one has. So that's been a lot of what it's been about the last few months. And I'm a firm optimist. I believe that things will get better. And it's a question of trying to manage yourself through it using all the tools and resources that you can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I know there'll be people rushing to your website. I've no doubt. David Thomas Media, and lovely to know that there are free tools and things we could all access on there. So thank you so much, David. I'm sure again there'll be questions. We'll come back to you soon. Thank you. Our final panelist is Leslie Gannon. And here's Leslie. Thank you for your patience, Leslie. And it's lovely to have you here. We thought it was important to connect with one of our unions. Leslie is the Assistant General Secretary of the Writers Guild of Great Britain, but also has experience of working across other unions, which I'm sure she will talk to you about. It's been fascinating talking to Leslie about hearing about what the Writers Guild has been doing, and particularly about the lobbying and this sense that, there's a bit of a call to arms. We can all be doing something in this time. So Leslie, it'd be lovely to hear about your role and what you've been up to with the Writers Guild. Thank you.
Great, thank you, and hi everyone. For those of you who don't know anything about the Writers Guild, we are a union that represents professional and aspiring writers across all of the different art forms: theatre, TV, film, video games, books, comedy, all of that. All of those writers, all members come together to be part of a community. And one of the things that we do know whenever we're considering people's well-being is that being part of a supportive community can really help. And so as soon as the pandemic hit, I mean, before the pandemic hit, we did quite a lot of this work, but especially once the pandemic hit, we knew that we had to find a whole range of ways to support our members across the whole spectrum of their well-being, really. So first of all, we made sure that all of our members had access to accurate and up-to-date information about their health and looking after themselves. It was very confusing in the early days. So we made sure we had a dedicated page where people could find out about their physical health and their mental health. We knew that for people with pre-existing mental health conditions, that it was going to be a particularly anxious time as access to services became restricted. So we made sure that we could signpost where they could get emergency support and help, maybe some emergency counselling, maybe just some resources that they could read about behavioural shifts and patterns that they could try and do at home to support themselves. And for those who perhaps are encountering levels of anxiety and stress for the first time and weren't used to really considering themselves to need support, how they could also access support in that way. We put some information out to all of our members straight away as well about finances, because we too knew that as soon as the theatres went dark, that it was vital that people knew where they could perhaps apply for some immediate grant support. We, like most of the trade unions, have got welfare funds and support for our members when they're in crisis situations that we can help out, and put some information for them there. Also, of course, it started to change the way people worked. As one lot of work stopped, new ways of working came into being as people were trying to find ways to plug that gap in income, but also find ways to keep busy and to put that work out and to keep engaged with their own creativity. Now, as a trade union and working with all the other trade unions in the entertainment sector, we have agreements with all of the theatres and producers and broadcasters around how much people should be paid, how they should be treated, and what should happen in certain circumstances, and around contractual understandings that everyone's based on. Now, a lot of those started to go out of the window. So one of the things that we've been doing very quickly was talking to theatres and producers and trying to make sure that there were new arrangements, that this didn't become a situation in which people could be more easily exploited. We knew that there were lots of people who were operating in good faith and who wanted to try and support financially and creatively artists at this time. And sometimes good intentions don't quite work out the way you want. So we've put together, working with UK Theatre and other colleagues, some guidelines around commissioning work for online, for example, information about what you might need to do, how you should be treated, what should happen about your rights, all of that around your professional life. And then also we knew that one of the things that was happening was that people needed to be heard. We felt that there was a lot of concern about what was going to happen to the industry, what was going to happen to people financially, what was going to happen around their mental health, around their physical health. And it's hard. It's hard to know how to access that. And this is where really unions come into their own, because our day-to-day bread and butter is working with politicians, campaigning with government, working with organisations to make sure that practices are inclusive and responsive. So we've been doing a lot of lobbying, working across the trade union movement, talking to the Chancellor, talking to the Treasury, working with other partners, the Creative Industry Federation, employers, really making sure that people understood the shortfalls of the provision that were put in place around financial support for the self-employed, the importance of making sure that those people who are sitting outside of one scheme or another are recognised, and that for some people it's for the first time ever that they'll be encountering the benefit system. For others, it's the first time that they will have to navigate claiming types of money from these grants, especially people who are new entrants. So we've been putting a lot of information out for people, but we've also been lobbying and working and campaigning, submitting questions, getting questions asked in Parliament, putting in evidence. So we've been trying to cover the whole thing. And if anyone wants to go and have a look on the website, there's a lot of information there. What we've also done is, and again, we do this with the Federation of Entertainment Unions, so with Equity and the Musicians Union and others, is that we've been working to ensure that there is free training available to our members. So we've got a whole host of training which we always provide free of charge, but we usually provide it face to face. We've moved a lot of that now online, and that training can cover everything from supporting your own well-being, how to stay calm in certain situations, through to the more business end of things, how to put together a business case, how to produce your own website, how to promote your work on Instagram, all of that work. So there's some training courses there as well. So across the board, a whole range of provision to support people's mental health.
Wonderful, thank you. And am I right in thinking, Leslie, that you don't have to be a member to access some of that support? There's some things that people can just come to your website and find for free.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we would always say that one of the great ways to support your well-being in this industry is to make sure you are part of a union, not necessarily our union, but a union, because of the amount of support and protection that we can offer our members. However, we also want everyone in the industry to be treated fairly. So if you go onto our website, there's a whole host of information, from a musical theatre kit, which we produced with the Musicians Union, which is all around contracts and collaboration agreements and working together, through then to how much you should be paid, guidance, and links to a whole range of different things. Anyone can access that. It's just, you just go to the Writers Guild.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And just so everybody watching is aware, if you come to this later, we will be sending out, for everyone who's registered, we will send you links to all of these various wonderful provisions that our panelists have talked about, so we can keep you all connected. Thank you so much, and I'm going to hand back to James.
Yes, thanks, Emily. I think it's brilliant. We've got such a wealth of expertise. Oh, there we go. Start my video. Camera on. There we go. Sorry, I had my camera turned off by my host. Yeah, it's wonderful. There's so much expertise on the panel and lots of areas that we'd like to come back to there. I know already quite a few people have been responding to something that several of the panelists have touched upon, which is the way that a sense of identity, a sense of self-esteem and self-worth as creative people is so tied up, understandably, with being creative. So we've already had some questions about this from the online chat. And so I'd like to pose a question to the whole panel, but let's start with Mary and then go through the panel, anyone who has further responses, about what would be some of your top tips. You've already shared some, but your best advice based on what you've been observing to those artists, those producers also, I think, as much as any other creatives are sometimes feeling this of wondering now that they can't produce shows and they feel like they don't have something to motivate their sense of a vocation. So your advice to artists and practitioners who are feeling that they don't have as much worth in this current time because they're not being as creatively productive. Any tips or advice you would give to people?
I think quite a few of the panelists, and I think David in particular, mentioned control, and certainly taking back, recognising what you can control, recognising what you can't control. And David did, there's actually quite a lot. If you look at it, there is a lot that we can control. You know, we can control our routine. One of the other panelists mentioned that you set up your own routine. The connections as well. So the things, exercise, so important, starts to build that getting into nature. There was a study that said, yeah, it's fine having your little bit of exercise. If you can get into nature, the actual difference that makes to well-being. Exercise, routine, meditation, that mindfulness, just a little bit of that. And the connections, because connection is so important around sort of mental health, mental well-being. And I think, I can't remember who mentioned it, it's the right connections. It is that, if we go back to social media, that you actually, and let's take it in social media, how many of us are going to put up and say what a terrible day we've had? We don't. We put up the best of what's going on. And then others are looking at that and going, oh, but that's not me. I'm actually feeling quite low. Why are they so happy? The comparison sets in. So many clients have come to me recognizing that and seeing the impact that it's having on their mood, on their mental well-being. And they're going, well, I've deleted Instagram. Or, do you know, I think it was perhaps Kisa who said, then no, just monitor you sort of, which sites do you want to look at? Yes, and the positive, limit your time on social media as well. All of these things, I mean, self-esteem itself is a big question, James, for sure. But self-esteem boils down to, for me, it's not about confidence, it's not about self-confidence, all of that. Self-esteem is the things we believe we can and can't do. And if we can look at the things that we can do, then absolutely, and build on them, recognize them, tell ourselves how good we are. All those skills that David talked about as well, that are, you know, transferable, we can use, that starts to build self-esteem.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mary. That's brilliant. And I guess, Anne-Marie, a similar tangent to that, if I can put the same question to you, that we know also that people are asking about when they're leading masterclasses on Zoom, talking to students as you are with the MTA being online, any advice you would give from your contact with students around how best to advise people, to advise students about self-worth in relation to creativity in this time when they may not have the same sense of creative output being possible?
Well, I think it's a bigger problem, isn't it? I think it's that pandemic or no pandemic, if your entire feeling of self-worth is tied up with your work, this is a problem. And I think systemically at drama colleges, historically, that has kind of been facilitated a little bit. So it's about empowering people to be well and to identify with themselves, as opposed to identify with themselves as the performer or as the creative. I think it's really hard to just go in and do a masterclass and try to kind of get everybody cheerful, because you don't know what's gone on before. I think as well, you know, teaching on Zoom and doing masterclass on Zoom is not a safe space. And it's I think people are forgetting that, because we can see everybody in very small boxes, but actually it's not safe. I couldn't ask my students personal questions because I don't know who else is in the room. I want to ask them personal questions, you know what I mean? But, because that's what our industry tends to do, isn't it? We have these great open discussions. So I don't think the Zoom forum is like a safe place to do anything. And I guess that's all everybody wants in a masterclass, is a little bit of escapism, actually, to just be. But I think fundamentally as well, we've all, you know, hopped onto this Zoom thing, but that highlights what, and one of the students sort of pointed this out to me when they were struggling, this format actually highlights what you can't get. So they're seeing a group of people that they absolutely, you know, love beyond anything, because that's what drama students do and that's what cast members do and all the rest of it. But actually that's all we're looking at, is what we can't have, and then we turn it off. And I think the sense of loss after that is quite huge. So this kind of creates as many problems as it's solving. And it's learning how to navigate in that. But I think going into college to do masterclasses, I think that's just a minefield, because you don't know what's gone on before, you don't know what the college's approach to everything is. It's I don't know. So I guess you just have to, not being flippant around, but just do your masterclass, because everybody's got a different story that you're not going to have time to know, nor should you know.
True. Very true, very true. And I know David's got some thoughts on this similar area in terms of self-worth in relation to work identity. David, over to you.
Yes, I've done a lot of work with people who've moved from employment, where they may have been employed for about 20 years, 30 years, sometimes at the BBC, which traditionally has had a high sort of value as a kind of vocational approach to work, that people really care about working there. And then they've left. And it's really interesting working with people, trying to help them understand how to describe themselves, because for 30 years they may have said, when someone says, what do you do? They just say, oh, I'm the BBC. And then they leave and they're not quite sure how to answer that question. And there's one or two techniques which I found help me, but also have helped a lot of other people. And that is to try to, as a freelancer, to try to not just combine everything in your life into one single model in your head, but to think of it as two parts. There's a professional side of your life, which is you, if you like, going out and earning or running your business or however much you want to, think about that. But it's the bit where you work, and it's the bit where you engage with people in the industry. But that's separate from the bit which is you, who's a person. And the bit that's the person is you off duty, if you like, for your business. Now, this is actually quite hard to do for freelancers, because very often they're almost sort of selling a very personal skill. But I still think it's a really helpful thing to do, and it can be done even for people who are actors or musicians. I was speaking to a very high, well-known West End actor who said that's how he approaches it. He thinks of his business being the acting and him being something else. And it's a really great mental space to occupy, because what it means is that you can set your routine around certain times of the day you're doing things for your work, and sometimes, for your professional life, and that's fine. And then there's other times of the day or week that you can do things which are you. And it forces you to think a little bit about what's always you and what's you because you're working. So that means that when you're not working, you don't lose who you are. It's quite hard to do at first, particularly if people are not used to thinking that way, but it's really effective. And what I found when I started being freelance myself, after, I was in my 40s and I'd had 22 years of being an employee, and suddenly I was on my own. What I decided to do was to have a routine where there were certain days of the week I wouldn't work. So they were off-duty days, if you like, and I told my family that. That those days are not normally working. There were certain times of the day I would not normally work. I'm an early bird, so this time of day, we're recording this at 10 to 6. This is the sort of time I don't normally work, okay? Because my brain doesn't enjoy that so much as it does early part of the day. So I started to have a routine that worked around that. But I also got a cheap telephone to use when I wasn't working. And I started to split up my life, even on social media. So 2 social media accounts, one which was more work oriented, and the other one which was for hobbies and people who did things, that I was friends with. 2 email addresses, one email address for your work contacts, and then another one for your friends and family. And it meant that I found I could switch off my work very easily, because I'd switch off the phone, that is the work phone. And so if I wasn't working in the evenings, I'd switch that one off. And it didn't lose me any work, because people would just leave messages and I'd pick them up early the next morning. But it did give me a safe space. And it made me feel not guilty at all, because I was giving myself time to have a personal life, which was slightly different and differently focused from the bit of me which was the business side of things. And it also meant that on the businessy side, I could try and just think about organizing the spreadsheets and all the stuff that is helpful so we get to pay the right amount of tax. But seeing that as work, just because I wasn't getting paid for that, didn't mean to say that it wasn't work. It was very much part of my working existence. But it then meant that when I wasn't working, I didn't have to worry about tax, because I just had to worry about what I was going to buy in Sainsbury's and do the cooking and whatever I was doing in my personal life. So I found that to be a really helpful way of getting me through the transition from someone who was working and thinking of myself as being a creative, but also realizing that I was always me. Doesn't matter what happens to me work-wise, I don't stop being me.
Yes, that's excellent. Thank you, David. And I think it's very much in relation to that. It took me a long time through life before I got what people are talking about in terms of unconditional acceptance or unconditional love, not being about getting a grade A, and I think particularly in creative areas, we can sometimes focus on the outputs. What's the review of the production? Did someone win an award for a performance? But actually, sometimes it is having that same sense of worth regardless of an outcome as well. Yes, thank you.
Just one other comment that actor said to me, which really stuck with me. He said, it's great when I think of my business side of my life, my professional side, as being slightly different from me, because when I go to an audition and don't get it, I just say to myself, oh, that wasn't right for my business on that day. Doesn't mean to say I'll never work again, but it just wasn't right for my business on that day. And they didn't take it personally.
Yes. Brilliant. That's really useful advice. Thank you very much. And I think now we'll pass over to some other panelists if you have further responses. Emily, do you?
Yes. So we have a question about the kind of future careers in the arts, and that sense that I think particularly for producers, but for many of us, many artists, there is so much uncertainty. And I was wondering, perhaps we could hear from Kaiser and maybe Leslie on how people might approach the uncertainties of going forwards, looking into the future.
Hi again. I think it's an interesting question. I don't think there's one answer for that. I think we need to go back perhaps to what got us into our area of the arts in the first place. Like, what makes us happy? What actually gives us that boost of our self-worth? Because if we go back to that place, so for instance, for me, I was doing a lot more events, production, stroke, being an artistic director and all of those things in terms of production on stages. But actually now there is no stage. So I've moved some things over to Zoom, and I'm in pre-production for some TV things. But before I was doing quite the reverse. I was doing a lot of stage things. So actually, it's about looking at what makes you happiest outside of what you had been doing, trying to get back in touch with who you are rather than you as being a productive person per se. But and some people have been getting into doing things like gardening, not necessarily being productive as in terms of delivering work, but delivering work just for you personally. And that actually has helped me in terms of getting new plants from the garden center and like falling in love with these plants and nurturing them, taking cuttings, propagating, all these different things. And baking. I know a lot of people have been baking, hence the shortage of flour. But just doing things creatively that don't necessarily have a productive output, but make you happy, that make you fulfilled. And actually you may get the answers that way, not trying so hard to be so focused. And I know that's very difficult. And it's easy for those of us in a privileged position who perhaps aren't financially worried to be able to, you know, get plants and do things. But it's a different way of looking at it. And perhaps it may work for you. May not work for all, but it's something to try. And in the end, you may have fun doing it anyway.
Yeah, thank you. Comes back again to this thing of so many skills. So creative people have many skills, and we're reassessing those and working out where they can travel next, and actually hopefully looking with some hope towards the future and how things could be different in a positive way.
Absolutely. And also the fact that now's the time where a lot of people are picking up new skills. There are a lot of free training courses. I know there are a lot of people who have offered to do free courses in producing Zoom events. So we can always retrain, we can brush up on our training, we can ask other people within the creative communities, even if we're not feeling as confident as going on, you know, these master classes and all these other things. Perhaps you may have learning barriers. Like myself, I'm dyslexic, so I don't learn at the same pace or in the same way as other people, and perhaps they may feel like they don't want to say that, but perhaps you could speak to somebody that you trust within the community who could go and seek out those things for you. So there are other ways of getting your creative mojo back in different ways. And yeah, I'm sure a lot of us here wouldn't mind sharing online. You could follow us online, you know, we have social media, most of us, I think. So there are other ways to access different things, and remembering that not everybody learns at everybody else's pace, and that's fine.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And Leslie, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a couple of really important things to remember. It's very uncertain times, but the arts have survived terrible times before. They've got through them, they've survived, they have evolved, but they have survived. And I think it's important to remember that there are a lot of quite apocalyptic headlines at the moment, and undoubtedly there are a lot of companies and venues and so on that are in difficulty, and a lot of us are working really hard to try and find solutions to keep them going and to help with that, and hopefully we will find that. But the industry itself as a whole will survive in one form or another. And so it's really important that we hold on to that and then start to remember to do a couple of things ourselves. And one of those is to value your work. There's a real temptation at the moment that people are really worried, and everyone wants to help, and they want to help people in lockdown, that people suddenly want to give away a lot of stuff for free of their own work, and to put stuff up and to do that. And we say, that's great, and we really appreciate that sentiment, but this is work, this is livelihood, as well as a sort of creative process. It is people's livelihoods, and so it's important that we keep holding on to the value of that work as professionals, so that when things do start moving again, as they inevitably will, the work as a whole hasn't been devalued by the amount that's been done for free. And it's really important. It's hard, but important to remember that. One of the things that we're doing is that we're campaigning to try and raise money and raise interest in a new commissioning fund, so that we know that in the future we'll want to make new work. People, who knows what it will look like, whether it will be outdoors, whether it will be in much changed physical venues, or whether it will be online, but we know that new work will be there. So we're trying to raise money to make sure that we can keep that commissioning flow happening further down the line. Right. And so this is the thing. Reskill if you feel you need to, if there are additional skills. Keep working, keep practicing, develop new skills, either physically or with your writing or your singing or your music. Develop that, but bear in mind that there will come a time when you can start earning from that again. But if you've given your whole catalogue away for free during these few months, then that's going to make it much harder.
Yeah. Thank you. That's very good advice. Can I hand back to James now?
Indeed, thanks, Emily. Yes, I think one of the key themes again that's coming through here, I liked the term that Leslie just used there about that the industry has not only withstood change, but it has evolved. And I think that's what we're seeing with almost everyone has evolved their practice in some way in terms of more digital interface. So a question for the wider panel here is around change. And obviously it's a whole other area of well-being and mental health, is how everyone deals with change in a very different way. And I wondered if any of you as panelists have particular observations or insights you'd like to share about approaches to change management and sensitivities to different people dealing with change at different paces and in different ways in a time when things are evolving quite quickly sometimes. Anyone in particular would like to begin there?
I've got something to say.
David, thanks.
Yeah, just because people look like they're coping with change, don't make the assumption you're the only one who isn't coping well with change. I think that there is I loved Kayser saying we were a bit too stiff upper lip. One of the things I like to do on my training is at the very beginning, just get people to admit that they don't know how to count and use spreadsheets, you know what I mean, on the financial front. But because I think it just loosens everybody up and they think, oh, thank goodness I'm not the only one. And I think there's an element of that. But I also think that it's good to try to talk about ideas with people who are friends or acquaintances. Just have a space where you feel you can just let your creativity come out of your mouth and chat about different things that might happen, either with people that you've worked with before. I think that can help, because it can make some of those ideas sound perhaps a bit far-fetched, but then the other person says, no, go on. That sounds quite interesting. And you think, oh, all right. So it's finding ways of doing that. It's not always easy to find people that you feel terribly comfortable with, especially if you're just starting out in the industry. But if you have had people you've worked with, you can put a little space aside to do that, even online. And don't believe everything you see on social media. That's the other thing. Or in the papers. I used to be a journalist, so don't believe what you see in the papers.
Indeed, I think part of mental health and well-being at the moment is limiting how much time you spend watching or digesting news on whatever medium you connect with it, isn't it? It's a bit too much if you engage with it too often. Anyone else that has any thoughts on change currently?
Yeah, I mean, we do quite a lot of work to support organisations through change. Often it's change that we've wanted to bring about. And one of the things that's really important to remember is that change is never just one leap. It's always made up of several steps. And so whether that's an institutional change, a political change, or a personal change, that breaking that change down from where I am now to where I want to be into much smaller achievable goals is really helpful, because that sense that you're trying to change something or you're trying to do something different and you don't feel like you're making any progress can often mean that you're just focusing on the end outcome. Whereas if you break it down into those smaller steps, you can see your own progress, but also see if something doesn't work. Well, at what point did it stop working? So I can only have to take it back 2 small steps and change direction. So I think that breaking it down is key.
That's great. Thank you very much, Leslie. Anyone else, any views, observations on change?
I think certainly for change, because for me, change does perhaps impact on that anxiety. It is the unknown. We don't know. And I so agree with Leslie that's saying breaking it down. But change, recognising that everyone is different. And I think maybe David touched on that we all see things differently, we all experience things differently, and we do what's right for you. People do what's right for them. And that change is perhaps for me, decide what's important for you. And then you let your priorities guide what you need next. And I always think, there was a client who said to me, is perhaps then looking at that change doesn't have to be big, for sure. A client who said, well, we don't need to change the world. That's what it's all about. It's not about that. But perhaps, again, looking inwards, looking at ourselves, and that self-acceptance of self, what we want, what we need, what we feel we're able to do, and going, well, that's okay. It might be a little change, it might be something huge, but that's all right for everyone. Everyone is absolutely different.
Absolutely. I think self-acceptance is a key phrase there, isn't it? And the fact that whatever you're feeling is okay. I think there've been a lot of posts on social media. Sometimes they can be positive and constructive, about people giving themselves permission not to write the great masterpiece of their career in this time, to recognize that just adapting to a changing environment is an achievement in itself, and to take that at their own pace, acknowledging what their feelings are at different stages of that process.
And quite crucial, I think, what you say there, noticing our feelings, accepting our feelings. And once we do that, once we recognize those feelings, those emotions, once we accept them, the change happens, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you, Mary. Kaiser, have you got something to add there? Yes.
Absolutely. And I think all of these points are really important and very helpful for all of us here, actually, as well as everybody else. But one thing I did want to mention is that the great thing about so many people doing so well at adapting to this change is that the rest of us can learn from some of the things people are doing that perhaps wouldn't work for us, and perhaps work really well for our learning style and our personality types, and also the work that we do. So what I would say about change is learn from everybody else, and start to adapt your style and your change according to some of the examples that you're seeing. And that can be so helpful and lessen our anxieties around change.
That's a brilliant observation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really great. Emily, shall I pass back over to you with our next question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you all. So we have quite a specific question that I think I'll probably direct towards David, if you could help us with this. It's about accessing the government financial support schemes for performers, how easy they are, how complex that might be. I don't know if you have any advice there, or where people can go.
Yes, so without getting too bogged down, the way the government sees the world is not the same way that we see it, by the way. I should just say that. So there's a mismatch between the model they have in their heads. And we have a very young, very inexperienced chancellor who, I think, to be fair, was desperately trying to do the right thing when he set up the schemes to help us in the industry, or to help all of us in the country. But I don't think he realized that people freelance. I honestly think that's been a massive learning curve for the Chancellor. I don't think any the less of him for that, but I do think there's been a bit of a blind spot there. So there are two schemes that the government set up, and one of them seems to be working quite well for people who are sole trader, set up as self-employed as a sole trader, and have been going for more than a year. And especially if you've been going more than 4 years, that scheme has worked really, really well, because the direction of travel of the money has been directly from the Treasury straight into your bank account. There's been no intermediary at all. The furloughing scheme had the intermediary of the employer, which again was quite a clever idea. But of course, if you freelance, then the employers very often didn't see you as someone who was going to be worthy of any help. So that's been a bit patchy. And a limited company type of freelancer has been completely out of the sights of the government. It's been quite extraordinary. I speak not least to someone who runs a small limited company. The lack of support there has been quite gobsmacking. So the unions have been doing an amazing job, and well done to the Writers Guild and everybody else in the unions who's been really, really pushing this, because I think that there can be no excuse now for the government not to know what an enormous industry this is and how precarious it is for the people who do the creativity. So for those of you who are feeling a bit abandoned, perhaps some of you from the government, because you don't quite fit into the schemes, you're not alone, and people are lobbying on your behalf. So please, there won't be a magic wand, I suspect, to wave, but people are aware that this is an issue. If you want to find out more about the specific schemes, and also one or two of the loan schemes, particularly the bounce back loan schemes, might be worth looking at if you are somebody who's running a small business in the creative areas. And so just don't dismiss it out of hand. It's never good to borrow money when you're not having a good time of it financially, but actually there are one or two things around that may be worth looking at. But the final word on this is that there are other funds, and Leslie actually mentioned one or two of them. I've been collecting a list on my website under the free stuff page of support for freelancers, where I've listed all the funds I've been able to try and find out about for the creative industries, where there may be some of those funds which can plug the gaps that the government isn't filling. But I've also put an explanation.
But just because someone seems to be coping doesn't necessarily mean they are. I know, Anne-Marie, we were chatting on the phone the other day about social media and so on, that sometimes people are putting out distress calls on social media, and maybe it's not the best place to have the conversation. And what would you advise if you're sort of thinking there's a subtext there that people might have things to chat about, but where to have those conversations? As you said, a masterclass isn't the right place.
I think this is really difficult. I think we have the saying at the college is that we always want to listen to what's not being said, because actually what's being said is invariably not the most interesting thing. So it's not about listening twice, it's just about listening to what they're not saying. And in terms of what we were talking about is, I think specifically though, this is to do with mental illness as opposed to mental health. And as you and I have spoken, I'd like to make that differentiation quite clear. That people are very good now at saying that they're struggling, because people are all, it's okay not to be okay. Everybody puts it out there. Everybody celebrates them saying it. Everybody shares their story, and we never stop, or some people do. There needs to be a stop point to not just say, this is okay. That there needs to be a stop point of, are you okay? And do you need it? Like, do people need a mental health MOT? And because that's not being discussed really. And it's interesting, isn't it? Even within this, we're all talking about really good mental health wellbeing stuff, but there is mental illness as well going on, which is really affected in this lockdown because of what we said first of all. So there are two strands to be looked at, I think, at the same time. So when people are writing, and it's great that people want to write and tell people and to reach out, but then what is our response? And none of us have a responsibility, really, do we, to those people? But socially, do we have a responsibility to kind of maybe check in and say, actually, that this could be just environmental, this could be right here and right now. But for some of these people, they also then will say this has been their reality for a long time, and they might be ill, and they could get treated for being ill, and their life might be so much better. So I think, as well as listening, it's also keeping an open mind, and it's not just, this will be fine, we can change, we can adapt, it's going to be okay. They're so trite, aren't they, those words? Whereas some people are genuinely really struggling and in a crisis, and we have to somehow be able to reach out to those people to tell them it's okay, and then point them in the right direction to get medical intervention.
Exactly. So taking conversations offline, if possible, to have more of a sense of signposting towards appropriate professional care.
I think so. It's certainly, certainly in our industry, I think we see so much of it, and it's so lovely having campaigned for mental, for greater awareness. It's really lovely to see how everybody now celebrates somebody saying that they're struggling, but we should be pointing, like, that's not what we need to, accept. If you're suffering from anxiety, you could be symptom free. So we don't need to celebrate you saying it. We need to get you symptom free somehow. So I think it just needs a little bit of a shift. But there is, and I think this has been demonstrated so brilliantly online recently, there is an ugly side to some of this that we also have to look at in order to deal with it, in order to get people better. And we can sanitize this subject sometimes.
Absolutely. No, it's a really important distinction you're making there as well. Any further observations from other panelists on that sort of area of the discussion? Mary, yes.
With what Anne-Marie's saying, but people reaching out, again, if they're reaching out, be that on social media, making that comment, and I loved what Anne-Marie said there. It is about what is not being said. It's about reading between the lines, and I find that in counselling, speaking to clients, it's very much the words that they use subconsciously. It's reading between the lines. It's what's not being said. So I know it's not ideal that people are posting certain things on social media, but for them, if that's their first way of reaching out, then that's great. Social media isn't the place to deal with it, and absolutely, James, but there's the opportunity to signpost, to pass them on to the people who can help. With the mental illness, as Anne-Marie has said, there are indicators sometimes of something quite big going on for individuals. So important, if that's their only way of doing it, if they can't say to someone face to face, this is how I am, then that's a way of reaching out, and important we have that opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mary. Any further thoughts there? Shall I hand back to Emily if there's another question there?
Hello, thank you. Yes, so we're sort of coming towards the end of our time, and obviously there are elements of this whole discussion that are fairly dark, but what we actually all wanted to talk about in our discussions with each of the panelists, and that's come through, is that there's also things to be appreciated, things to be celebrated. And I'm just wondering if our panelists might be able to give us a final sort of hopeful thought or suggestion, whether that's about what we can do as individuals in terms of lobbying, getting our voices heard, looking after ourselves. I just think that would be, it would be lovely to hear from each person sort of once more with something positive. If you can find something, that would be lovely. Thank you. Hey, Sarah.
I think one of the things I'm finding really positive is that because everything is now online, we're having more of an international conversation. around the things that we're doing. Things are being shared more internationally. There are new international platforms being made for people to share work. So yeah, that's given me a lot of hope for the time being, in the fact that, yeah, there are a lot of international conversations. We don't have to pay large amounts of money to fly people in, put them up in a hotel, they're at home. So brilliant. That's actually cutting through a lot of the costs. So yeah, it's a really hopeful place to be in, where we can have international conversations and share a lot more.
Lovely. I'm thinking actually, because can we all just come back onto the screen for this final bit? It would just be really nice to see everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Geza. That's great. Who else? You have to put your hands up now. Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, I'm going to steal all my final comments from clients, because they come across to me as quite important. And maybe with that one actor who said, do you know, a little win every day makes a difference. Absolutely, just that little win. And what I said earlier, we don't need to change the world. And an actor friend, I'll name him Joe Frost, who set up again a podcast or something on social media around men's mental health, and this is one that's going to stick with me throughout lockdown, and I use a lot, when he said, you know, we don't have to come through this with a new business plan and a six-pack, which is spot on.
Absolutely.
Thank goodness for that.
Okay, David.
Leslie.
In the business plan though, David. Yes.
I'd just like to say that everyone has been isolated, but to remember that you're not alone, and that there are a number of organisations, whether they are unions, whether they are counselling services, whether they're NHS, whether they're private facilities, there are a whole range of people who are working. We're working full time. We're still able to support people. We're still able to provide advice, and we're able to walk alongside you as you're having those difficulties. And I think it's also important to stress, and reflecting Anne-Marie's point, if you are someone who is in crisis or is having significant health problems, that your rights are enshrined, and that there are organisations who will protect you and help to ensure that those rights are upheld. So do reach out to one of the many organisations that are there, and together we will help you get through it.
Thank you.
I've got
Anne-Marie.
I think not trying to be sort of cheerful about it, you know, God forbid, but it's really exciting. I'm with Kaiser. I think it's really exciting what this is offering us. I think it's going to force a change, isn't it? That, you know, nobody even knew that we needed, and it's going to create new opportunities for all of us, and that is genuinely exciting. You said about being international. We've been having this just as an uplifting, sort of making the students try to feel a bit better about at this moment in time their crappy lives, to quote them. But so, you know, they've had guests at the moment from the West End, from Broadway coming over. There's no way on earth we could afford that normally, and it's those little sort of things that spark you and inspire you. And I think what as a community we can do, you know, as writers and creators, most of us of a certain age, we didn't know to explore this. We just thought we could all FaceTime and it was great, or we might have tweeted every so often. But there's loads of possibilities that we're kind of going to be forced into, I guess. And that can only be exciting, and proves that art will always live on. And that's what we all want to happen.
Thank you. Yeah. David.
Just on a hopeful note. I mean, two hopeful notes, really. One is from a perspective as someone who does training. I've been doing online training for the last 5 years or so with the Federation of Entertainment Unions. Nearly all my other clients have not been interested at all until this year, until this last month. And now suddenly everybody's realizing that we can do things creatively around helping people with financial skills. We don't have to be in the same room as them. Now, I do think there is something that we're missing by not being in the same room. I should just say that. I'm missing some element of that. But we can certainly achieve a lot in terms of networking people as well as learning. by doing things online. So that's a hopeful. The other side of it is that I think what will happen is that as we start to move out of this situation, because we don't yet know what the new normal thing is, but that's okay, nobody does. The whole planet's been affected by this, and we'll get there. But as we move out, I think people's creative juices will start to come into play really strongly. And I think that everybody who's watching this is a creative person, you know, and I honestly think that there will be ways of plugging in that we don't know yet, but it will happen. And I just like to reiterate Leslie's point, the industry will survive. It'll be different, and it'll be creative, it'll still be creative, and there'll still be a place for that creativity. I'm absolutely sure of that.
Thank you. Anne-Marie?
Can I just come back on David's point? Because also, if right now you don't want to be creative and that's too hard, then getting out of bed's a win, isn't it? Or just turning your remote on. Everything's a win right now. If you're surviving it, you're winning. If you're watching this, you're winning because you're up. You've managed to turn something on today. That's a really great achievement, and that might be all you do today. Good for you. So it hasn't got to be big wins. It's what's right for you right now.
Lovely, thank you. James?
Yeah, just to add to that, I thank you so much for all those positive comments. It's really, really brilliant. And it brought to mind something a director once said to me, which is that to bring it back to the art form of musical theatre, they're actually talking about theatre generally, but I think it goes double for musical theatre. And their perspective was, and I put this on my desk as a quote to remind me, they said theatre or musical theatre is the art of making the impossible possible. And it just puts into perspective that what creatives do in any era, in any context, is an act of a sheer flight of making something happen that previously didn't exist. And I think what we're seeing in these circumstances is people adapting, perhaps more than we remembered, that human beings are incredibly adaptable. And that gives a lot of hope towards what will happen in the musical theatre industry and in the theatre industry generally, I think, as we move forward and as things evolve. So there's a lot to feel positive about in the future. And in line with that, it brings us into telling you about our next event. Anyone listening to this, please do join us on Tuesday, the 9th of June. We're going to be having our next panel discussion, again presented by both Mercury Musical Development and Musical Theatre Network. That's going to be called Making Space for Musical Theatre, where we'll be looking towards the future with a panel of artistic directors who are all in producing theatres, talking about some of the challenges and some of the opportunities for when the theatres reopen, how to make sure that new musical theatre has a space in those venues. So that'll be very much a future-focused conversation. That's Tuesday, the 9th of June, 4 till 6 p.m.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I do just have to mention the other half of our wonderful team, Martin and Ellen, who've been backstage during this, making sure everything happened beautifully. So thank you, Martin and Ellen. And a huge thank you to our panel. So many wise words, great advice, real insights. I feel like I've learned a lot. I love the idea that we're all going to keep learning, that as creative beings, we all have so many skills to share. We have the ability to collaborate, which is something we are all great at in the arts and will continue to do as we go into our new future. Thank you. Let's stay connected. I think there have been some lovely connections made here, and we'll make sure that everyone watching will get all the links to all the companies and all the services that are here on this panel. And a big thank you to the panelists, Kaiser, Mary, David, Leslie and Anne-Marie. Really appreciate your time and your knowledge and your skill and your kindness. Thank you all, and bye-bye to everybody watching. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.